Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are happy to welcome you to the Master-class by Boba Dorfa. My name is Georgi Gogolev. I'm with RVC. We've recently published a book by Boba Dorfa, which is available here at 800 rubles. So if you get a book here, you can certainly get it signed by Bob himself. And Bob has come to Russia to promote this book, so I hope you're going to hear more from him now. Nikolai, would you like to tell them more about the book? This is Nikolai Mitushin. He's investment director of the PRT fund, and as the scientific editor of this book, he's going to tell them more. Thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction, Bob, and myself as well as Steve. I think the three of us met at Berkeley in 2006. We went there for the technological entrepreneurship program run by Intel Capital. Back then, Steve had just published a book called 4 Steps to Epiphany, and I see that some of you have even read the book. It was in this book that Steve actually contributed this unusual idea that a company could be built according to a specific recipe. He's a well-known serial entrepreneur, and you're going to hear more about him from Bob. Steve has launched 8 different businesses, and he realized that actually all his successful ventures followed the same recipe. It was this recipe that he actually described. Actually, what you see now, the startup, the the manual of the founder, is actually the new version, if you like, of the 4 Steps to Epiphany. So Steve essentially gave us an algorithm to build an enterprise, and this is obviously a much bigger book. And it also talks about consumer internet projects, it talks about web and mobile businesses. Also, this book talks about the founders of PRT, Ratmir Timashev and Andrei Baronov, my partners in the fund, by the way. Actually, the first company called Aelita Software was sold at $120 million. It was SDF conference in 2007. He was slightly drunk, but he said, I know all the steps to building a company that's gonna be worth $1 billion, and that's what I'm going to do. That was 5 years ago, and today Veeam Software is valued at about $1.5 billion. It has a pretty sizable revenue and keeps growing like crazy, and I think that this is a good exploration of how these different steps work. Actually, this case is also covered in this book to prove that this customer verification, customer development model is as applicable to Russia as it is to any other country. And after this introduction, I'd like to hand the mic over back to Georgi so that he can give you Bob. I understand that, according to the agenda, Bob is going to talk to us for about an hour. After that, we shall have enough time for Q&A, about 40 minutes. This will be followed by a 15-minute break. And after that, we shall have an informal discussion, if that is, you still have the power and the interest.
Good. The floor is yours.
Great. Hello, everybody. How you doing? Okay. Great. We have any engineers in the room? And no engineers can't be. Am I in Moscow? It must be Cleveland. Okay. The most famous, most important motto of engineers all over the world is technology is wonderful when it works. And we are having total technology failure here. And to be honest, I've given this slideshow 8 or 9 times this week in Moscow, and I'm getting tired of it. And if I'm getting tired of it, it's not going to be fun for you. So we promised you 12 thoughts about how to build your startup, and I have them all written down right here, and if you forgive me, I think you might actually enjoy this more. I'm just going to talk to you about customer development and startups and life in this insane field that we've all chosen for our life's work. Many of us have chosen for our life's work. When you're 63, you've probably made your choice. Most of you still have a chance to escape. And so I think I'm going to start with two words, not one, and those two words are Steve Blank. How many of you are familiar with Steve Blank and some of his work? That's a shame, okay? You should all start to spend time first on steveblank.ru, which is a fast-growing site that seems to be doubling in page views every month here in Russia. It's being translated by Nikolai, who you just met, and some of his team and other friends and people all over the place. RIS Ventures, I guess, is helping. And what we're trying to do is to translate the best and the most sort of relevant to Russia blog posts about entrepreneurship, startups, founders, things like that, so that they will be as available to you here in Russia as they are all over the English-speaking world. For those of you who are comfortable reading English, I can't recommend a website more than steveblank.com, which has hundreds and hundreds of articles. More important, first of all, there's nothing for sale there. There's no advertising there. It's all something, and we'll talk more about those two words, Steve Blank, in a minute, but it's all for the benefit of entrepreneurs over the world, and about 250,000 of them come there a month, partly for Steve's brilliance, partly for my occasional brilliance, but more for the tab that says Resources for Entrepreneurs, which has lists of dozens, I think actually hundreds, of tools and things, many of them free, none of them paid links, 12 ways to do A/B testing, 12 ways to measure your sort of traffic and tracking and things like that. All kinds of links to articles. Everything Steve and I do for entrepreneurs is available on the open web, open source, and so it is a smorgasbord of advice and support and ideas and essays and things. So if you take one thing away, oh, look at that, technology. All right, we're going to do a first customer development exercise. How many would rather have slides? Okay, good. The hell with the slides. That was okay. We say, listen to your customers, do what they say. So I'm actually very happy to be the slideless slideshow. Could be Russian history in the making. Anyway, so steveblank.com, steveblank.ru, right? Second, I don't speak any Russian other than vodka brands, and I hope that Nikolai pointed out to you his deep commitment to Russian entrepreneurs. He met Steve back in 2007, 6 years ago now, took his course at University of California in Berkeley in the customer development method, and said, Russian entrepreneurs need this. And Nick has spent a tremendous amount of his time bringing customer development to Russia, using it. I think I did hear him talk about how he used it to help more than a few Russian startups use the process to grow and prosper. And he has also spent a great deal of time, I guess the one place where I'd like to have a slide. I don't need a slide. I can use the real thing, right? Spent hundreds of hours of his time helping to translate our Startup Owner's Manual into Russian. We had a real professional, high-quality translator. Nick's job was to make sure that the methodology came through properly and that it read properly for all of the complex terminology and marketing thinking and all of that is so important that translators who don't know customer development can really do. And that's a translation of this monster up here, 608 pages, and between the two covers of the book, we think there are more than 500 stupid startup mistakes. And how do we know that? Because Steve and I made them personally over our 75 years between us. That's not 75 years apiece. I'm not quite that old. 75 years between us building companies, 8 for Steve, 7 for me. So a little bit about Steve. Steve's number 8 company, actually his number 7 company and his number 8 company both set records in Silicon Valley. Number 8, a company called Epiphany, set a record for going from an idea on a cocktail napkin to a market capitalization of $8 billion, the fastest in the history of Silicon Valley. Okay, not bad for a son of Russian immigrant parents. Grew up in a small house, small apartment in a housing project in Queens that looks a lot like many of the housing projects around Moscow, only smaller. Steve's seventh company set a record as well. Set a very different kind of record that's actually a strange record to talk about here in Moscow. That was a record from going from the cover of Wired magazine, picture of Steve and his co-founder, right on the cover, full cover, in all kinds of yellows and greens and purples that Wired is famous for, saying, "At last, the future of video games is here." This was in 1993, before there were online games. It was actually before our former Vice President Al Gore invented the internet, and if you believe that, I have other fairy tales I can tell you. And it went from raising $35 million to launch a company called Rocket Science Games, where they hired the best developers, the best designers, the best engineers, the best salespeople, the best finance and marketing people, and they set the all-time speed record at Silicon Valley for going from the cover of Wired magazine to the bottom of the toilet, flushing $35 million down that toilet in the process. How did they do that? Right, I just told you about their World Series Olympic management team. Not one of them played video games. So they built all these high-tech, fancy, great technology, wonderful wizard video games, but they never showed them or tested them with, how silly, gamers. Who would need to do that when you have brilliant engineers and marketing people? Why would you want to see if gamers like playing with the games? And I think two things about that story. First, I think it was that company, his seventh out of 8, that led him to this whole customer development process that he has been developing and working on and rebuilding and improving for almost 11 years now. And second, it led to, or I don't know if it led to, but it's really a symptom of one of the biggest differences between Silicon Valley and Moscow, or in Russian entrepreneurship, and that is when you are the CEO of a failed startup in Silicon Valley and they bury your startup, first of all, they don't bury you. Secondly, you now have a new word on your resume, experienced. You're an experienced founder, and it is a badge of honor, not a badge of shame, as it is often considered here. And it will take time for that to change here in Russia. It will take time and successes and guys and ladies rising from, the bowels of failure to do their second or third startup. And if you are truly an entrepreneur, you're not going to do one startup, even if it makes you hundreds of millions of dollars. You're going to do one, and if you make a lot of money, it's okay. Well, what am I going to do with that money? I'm going to start another one, and another one, and another one. And if you fail, you're going to go out with your friends and drink a few bottles of vodka, maybe take a weekend off, and then you're going to do it again, because that's what real entrepreneurs do. And I will tell you from my own personal experience on 3 different occasions, my wife, who also has an office at home, couldn't stand the noise in the house when I was working at home, so we built her an office in one of the buildings apart from the house. 3 different times I had to walk out to that office to say, honey, we had a really bad day, we lost $1 million. And the first time I did it, it gave me the courage to do it 2 of the other times. I should have done it 4 other times, but I figured 3 was enough, and I didn't have to tell her about all of them. The first time I did it, she said the most wonderful thing a wife could say. That's okay, you'll figure it out. And that was like the end of the conversation. That was, oh my God, $1 million, how could I do that? How can I be so stupid, invest in that damn company, and so on and so forth. And so you got a little bit of a taste of Steve Blank, who at When he left this $8 billion company at the peak of the internet bubble, he did something all entrepreneurs aspire to but shouldn't aspire to. He checked a little box on the to-do list of make more money than God. And when he did that, he said, well, okay, what am I going to do now? Do another startup and see if I can make more money than that? I'm going to spend the rest of my career giving back to the entrepreneurs who helped me be so successful. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the way startups are built, and I'm going to develop a method for doing it the blank way or my way or the right way. And I'm going to teach that and try it and test it and prove it. And hopefully I'm going to make a small dent in the entrepreneurial universe. And so he took a part-time job for $1 a year as a professor of entrepreneurship at University of California at Berkeley and started working on the customer development process. And today, that process is taught in 60 or 70 universities that we know of. It's been used and tested and proven by thousands of startups that we know of and many more that we don't think we know of. It's used by the United States National Science Foundation to take pure research scientists and engineers who have done sort of heavy, geeky laboratory stuff and train them in taking their brilliant innovations and turn them into companies, usually not by having the scientist turn them into a company, but by creating a dating service where the scientist can meet an equally crazy business person and together teach them the customer development method and help them figure out how to make their innovation into a successful, scalable, profitable company. And so somewhere about 20 years ago now, my 7th startup started working for Steve's 8th startup. We did a lot of the go-to-market work and sort of customer development work for his number 8, Epiphany, when I was the co-founder and CEO of a CRM and marketing strategy consulting company called Marketing One-to-One. It was really doing CRM before anybody called it CRM. And so Steve and I got to be good, we worked together, we fought like cats and dogs. The best news was that Epiphany was the second best IPO I ever invested in. It partly because he paid us in stock, because we're poor little venture-backed startup. We don't have a lot of money. Could we pay you in stock? And we had done that a few times before, and it worked out pretty well. So he said, sure. And as I said, his IPO was the second best in my career. I had 7 IPOs out of 27 investments, 7 IPOs, 6 went into the toilet, and everything else you can imagine in between. And the second best IPO returned $385 to $1 invested, which is a thrill I wish on each of you as founders as much as I wish it on you as investors. The best one, which I continue to razz Steve about, actually made it for a few brief days before somebody put that pin in the internet bubble, made it from $1 to $900 a share of stock, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful thing. So I've done 7 startups myself, none of them ever raising $1 of venture capital. In fact, I don't really fundamentally believe in venture capital until you have gone all the way through this painful exercise I'm going to talk to you about called the customer development process. So I guess that's enough on Bob Dorf. Let's talk about why we need a new way to build startups, okay? In the late 1800s, all of a sudden, big corporations were starting to form in the United States. The railroad had connected the 2 sides of the country. Railroads were big businesses. Successful companies could now sell goods all across the United States, not just within a horse and buggy ride of their manufacturing facility. And so these companies were starting to get sizable, and the deans and provosts and presidents of Harvard Business School, of Harvard University, said, Maybe it's time we had a training program for the executives that are going to run these companies, because up to now we don't really have any kind of business training. And they invented something called the MBA, which, how many of you have one of those? Oh, but one, two, couple. Okay, right? Master of Business Administration. And what did it teach? It taught cost accounting, it taught finance, it taught marketing, it taught operations, taught strategy, all the things that you need to run a big company. And that was the first class of Harvard MBAs, graduated in 1908. It was the first Masters of Business Administration issued anywhere in the world. I think, as far as we know, anywhere in the world. And so for the 100 years from 1908 to 2003, which is only 95 years, in that period, when people were doing startups, everybody treated them like smaller versions of big business, right? Okay, you got to have a big financial plan, you got to have a business plan, you got to have an operating plan, you got to have all this stuff, because that's what we learned in business school about how you run a company. And the only difference we wise men and ladies can see is that a startup is a company. It's a small company, not a big company. And the only difference is it's a small version of a big company. And that was a fundamental mistake for a couple of reasons. First of all, big companies have lots of things they know, right? They know who their customers are. They know who their competitors are. They know the features and functions of the products their competitors sell, right? So they have lots of knowns that they can deal with. And if you're the CEO of a big company and you can say to your head of sales, well, we grew 12% last quarter and 10% the quarter before. Let's shoot for 15% next quarter. And we got these 4 major new customers last quarter in the transportation industry. Let's see if we can get 4 more there and 2 more in a new market sector, right? They were dealing with a whole lot of knowns, a whole lot of facts, and you can run a business to execute on those knowns, right? You can set goals, you know what features you want to build or add to your product in the next quarter or the next year. Relatively speaking, certainly compared to a startup, it's very easy to run a big established business. Now let's talk about a startup. It's not just a small one of those at all, right? What a startup is all about unknowns. You, by definition, on the first day of your startup, you have no customers. So how could you possibly know what those customers want? And also, by definition, you really have no competitors because you haven't entered a market yet. So you don't know what they're selling or not selling, what they're charging. You don't really know who your competitors are because you don't really know what your product is yet or who you're marketing it to. So how can we apply all this sort of execute stuff to a company that doesn't really know anything? But the wizards of Wall Street and venture capital said, well, in business school we learned there ought to be a financial plan, there ought to be an operating plan. In fact, there ought to be a business plan. How many of you have written a business plan? Okay. Anybody spend more than 2 months writing a business plan? Okay, 1, 2. Okay. What's in a business plan? You write it as if you know everything. We know who the customers are going to be, what they're going to buy, what they're going to pay, where they're going to come from, what our marketing is going to do to get them. But really, it's all made up. You have no idea. You don't know who the customers are because you don't have any. You've never met one. You don't know what they're going to pay because you don't know whether your product is good or bad, cheap or expensive, fast or slow, better than competition, not as good. So you write this business plan. Why? To get somebody to write you a check, right? And at the back of this beautiful 30, 40-page document are 5 spreadsheets, right? Market analysis, revenue analysis, profit and loss, cash flow, balance sheet for 5 years. And on the last page, you start to tell me that you can tell me exactly that in the second quarter of 2014, you're going to have $560,000 worth of revenue, 82 customers, 6 new customers, 9 salespeople, and a partridge in a pear tree. How can you possibly have any idea what the second quarter of 2014 is going to look like? And you're actually even smarter than that when you write a business plan. You can tell me what your year 5 revenue and profit is going to be, right? It's going to be somewhere around $100 million, and it's going to be a profit of somewhere between $12 and $25 million. Why? Is it because we all use the same crystal ball? I don't think so. The reason why is because that's what venture capital investors want to see before they'll write you a check. And we are pretty certain that hiding somewhere in Microsoft Excel is a little Easter egg, a little button you click, and you don't have to do anything else, and somehow the spreadsheet winds up at $100 million in revenue, $15, $16 million in profit. It's a very nice thing of, Bill Gates to build in. He probably used it well when he raised money for Microsoft. So now you go and you spend 6 months talking to investors. Somebody writes you a check based on this business plan. In reality, that business plan, which you learned to write in the business department of your university, was really taught to you in the wrong department. It should have been in the English department, in the creative writing cluster, because it's all fairy tales. But because somebody gives you a check and says, okay, I'm going to invest based on these fairy tales, you now go out and try to make all the fairy tales come true. And every time one of the fairies falls off the wagon, your venture capitalist beats the crap out of you. What do you mean you didn't hit the $2 million fourth quarter revenue number? Didn't you know that you were going to miss it? Didn't you know that that was your number? And didn't you tell me when I invested that it was going to be $2 million in the fourth quarter? So, well, if you're honest, you say, we didn't really know that. We just put that number there because we knew if it wasn't that big, you wouldn't invest. And now you two are locked in hell together. You're trying to execute a plan to make that investor happy, but you can't quite tell him or her that you made the whole thing up. And when you write this business plan, and let's say you spend 2 months doing it, you have built yourself a sort of cast in concrete operating plan for a business based basically on guesses and fiction and stuff you made up to get somebody to write you a check. So it's like swallowing a big bottle of poison and saying, I now have to live with this horrible disease for 5 years and do what it says whether it works or not, because otherwise my investor is going to beat me up at the meeting. We run a program all over the world called the Lean Launchpad. I teach it here at Skokovo. I've done it twice now. And in the same 8 weeks, you can spend writing your business plan. You can use the customer development process to take the idea for your business. Most ideas for a business are written on a cocktail napkin. There's either stain from a vodka glass or a beer bottle on that cocktail napkin, because it's usually done in a bar by 2 or 3 smart people sick of their regular job and wanting to do something else. And they start scribbling and scribbling, and they come into the Lean Launchpad with that idea, and in 8 weeks of using the customer development process, they often make immense progress. The biggest single amount of progress we know of is a company that went through the Lean Launchpad process that Steve teaches at Stanford University. They went through it about 2 years ago, and within 8 weeks of completing the course, they got a check from an investor for $3.5 million for a very innovative way to take weeds out of organic farms by creating a laser lawnmower robot that would march down the row in a farm, a row of organic crops where you can't use chemicals, and what you normally have to do is use very expensive labor crews that are literally out there in the field. That's a weed, pull it up, that's a crop, leave it alone, that's a weed, back and forth for hours. And in the United States, we have, I'm sure you have an organization just like this in Russia, the Immigration Service. And when somebody shows up on your organic farm wearing an Immigration Service hat, all of a sudden there's nobody weeding the field. It's like they vaporized, because not every one of them has their papers in order, and they don't want to meet the guy in the hat because they'll be going back home to Guatemala or Mexico or wherever. And so this laser-powered robot lawnmower drives its way down the farm, and the first laser looks at every green thing it sees and says, that's a crop, leave it alone, that's a weed. Laser number 2, zap it, burn it, kill it. And moving at a modest speed, this thing can clear 90+% of the weeds out of an organic crop. And so, in fact, in that particular Stanford course, the 5 brilliant engineers who designed and conceived this idea were thinking halfway through the course that they were going to get through the course just on sort of customer interviews and feedback and all the things I'll tell you to do in customer development. And sort of about halfway through, they have their sort of session with Professor Blank, who says, so guys, where's the product? They said, what do you mean, where's the product? We're students. We've got a whole bunch of courses and so forth. And he says to them, well, you know what this is? This is a B, right? Letter B. No prototype, that's your grade. Prototype, this is an A. 5 highly motivated graduate engineering students spent 3 sleepless nights building a semi-working prototype. They took it out to farmers, they took it out to farm shows, showed it off, advanced it, moved it forward, and that's how they got their $3.5 million in under a total of 16 weeks, which can often be the amount of time it takes you just to write the business plan and make it all nice and pretty and put it in a nice folder and all that sort of stuff. And the 8 weeks or so it takes you to write the business plan is nothing compared to the amount of time of yours that investors will waste before they write a check. The other thing I was going to tell you is that in Bogota, Colombia, where the engineers are nowhere as sharp as the engineers are in Moscow, and to some degree the ideas are not as aggressive or as smart as a lot of the startup ideas I see here in Russia. We ran a team of 25 startup teams through the customer development process, 8 weeks from cocktail napkin to completion. And at the end weeks, out of the 25 startup teams, 6 or 7 of them were still lost and, wandering in the desert. 8 of them had customer revenue. 1 of them had 315 paying customers, 8 weeks from a cocktail napkin. And the difference is the way customer development forces you to think about your business. Up until Steve started sort of, preaching customer development, the way most startups were built were 3 bright engineers from MSU who are sitting in that bar, they have an idea, they write it down on a cocktail napkin, they clink a couple of vodkas, and I understand this has to be done in 3s in Russia, clink a couple of vodka glasses, wake up the next morning, lock themselves in a room, and build the product for 6 months, right? They, in a dark room, music playing, code, test, code. Okay, product's done. We're 3 bright MSU engineers. Now all we need are the customers. Every customer is clearly going to see that they absolutely have to have this product, that it's brilliant and perfect, and so on and so forth. Well, except nobody told the customers that. The customers didn't read the business plan that says They will buy 3 of these a month for the rest of their lives, and they'll give 1 as a Christmas gift, and they'll give 1 to a friend, and they'll invite 4 friends to come and buy, and those friends will invite 4 more friends, and everybody's going to be rich and happy. The customer development process suggests that you think about your business an entirely different way, and that on the first day after you sober up from that cocktail napkin session, the team splits in half, and half of the team is code, 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 QA, QA, build, build, build. The other half of the team isn't touching the product at all. They are totally engaged with customers and potential customers, doing customer discovery to find out whether the customers give a crap that your brilliant engineers from MSU are off there building this thing. Do they even care about the problem that the thing solves, and do they have any interest in the thing at all? And this thing can be physical goods, it can be software, it can be a website, it can be a mobile app. Today you can build just about anything. The thing you can't build is customers. And 99% of startups today don't fail because somebody couldn't build whatever it was. That happens if you're trying to build a time travel machine or an anti-gravity machine or an instant weight loss pill. But there's so much available technology and technology wisdom that you can build almost any product today. And so the problem startups have is not can we build it, it's will anybody give a crap when we send out the birth announcement, because if they don't, the greatest product in the world with no customers does not make a company. And so customer development will beg you to do these 2 things at the same time. Half of the people talking to customers, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And as they learn from those customers, feed the information down to the other half. No, don't build that, build this. Don't do it that way, do it this way. It's got to sell for $29, not $49. What can we do to change the product cost? And they're continuously feeding the developers as the developers are continuously building the product, almost always using agile development that can accommodate these short-term changes. When you started to do this 10 or 15 years ago, I mean, I'm so old, I remember when we decided to change the colors on the home page of a website, and it took a crew of 3 the entire night. I'm not talking until 7 at night, I'm talking until 7 in the morning to change the color scheme on a web home page. Is there anybody in this room who couldn't do that in 30 seconds right now? Maybe a minute if you're not a techie. And in the old days, you were sort of locked into a firm build plan called a waterfall development plan, where first you did this, then you did this, then you did this, then you did this. And it was all designed to tie out to the date of first product ship. The first day you were going to ship, that's when you were going to buy the champagne, have the press party, have the launch, have the balloons. You were going to have 15 people on the sales force ready to sell because you were sure there was going to be so much demand. And if halfway through that process, customers said, well, we don't like it or we don't want it, and you went down to talk to the development people, they would say, well, we can't change anything now. We'll be 3 months late on the launch date. What are we going to do with all the champagne and the balloons and the hotel reservation and the announcements and the promises to the investors? So they keep on building the product, even though the customer feedback was saying not so good, because nobody wanted to get beat up by their investors. Agile development frees you from that trap because you're building your software in small, sort of integratable bites, and you can change a bite when you hear that a different bite might be much more helpful, more attractive to your customers. So the first step in customer development, it's got nothing to do with coding. It's got nothing to do with talking to customers. It's something to do with translating, excuse me, translating that cocktail napkin into I do want to use just a couple of slides here. Translating that cocktail napkin into something that looks like this. This is what's known as a business model canvas. Anybody here heard of Alex Osterwalder? Oh, good. Well, I hope by the weekend every one of you will have heard of and looked up Alex Osterwalder. Alex is a young Swiss business genius who, as his PhD thesis, proposed that you could summarize everything, every moving part of a company in one piece of paper, in 9 boxes that you see up here, right? And that if you do this, you can do it in a few hours or a day. And what you're doing is thinking through not just what my product is going to be, what it's going to do, what are the features and functionality, but every aspect of the business, down to what partners do I need to launch this business, where am I going to get my raw materials, or are there any special resources I need, what's the cost structure, what's the revenue structure, things like that. And when you start the customer development process, instead of spending 2 months writing a business plan, spend 2 days thinking about your business model, okay? And I'm not going to walk through every box of the business model, but I want to talk to you about a couple of them, okay? Customer segments. Most of us, when we start our business, our customers are businessmen who travel age 25 to 49, who travel more than 6 times a year, because we're doing some, iPhone expense management app. What you want to do is to define this as tightly and as narrowly as you possibly can, because as a startup, you're not going to get all those customers. As a startup, you're only going to afford to get a handful or a few hundred of those customers. And what you want is the customers with the greatest pain, the greatest suffering, where your product can help them the most. Because they're the ones that are going to buy your product when it's full of bugs and it's not complete, and there are no guarantees and so forth, because they have the greatest pain. If you were in the Band-Aid startup right, and you walk across the street and there's a man lying on the street bleeding, he's not going to ask you, hi, have your Band-Aids been tested by hospitals, and do you have one in blue, and how thick is the cotton? He's going to say, I want it right now. Not worry. And you want to find customers with that intensity of pain or need as your very first customers, for a couple of reasons. First, they're going to buy your product even though, and listen, it's not perfect, it's got some bugs, it crashes once in a while, I don't care, I am going to get fired if I don't fix this problem at work, and this looks like it'll do the job. My wife's going to leave me if I don't, remember to take out the trash and do this and do this. I need that reminder app, or the divorce is going to cost me a lot more than the app. Somebody who really has a problem that your product can solve, okay? And if you think about the way products are sold, they're sold fundamentally only for 2 reasons. They're sold in business mostly because they solve a problem, because nobody goes to their boss and say, hey, I want to buy this with company money because it'd be nice to have. Just doesn't happen, right? Boss, we have a real problem getting our receivables into the company faster. This crazy guy has some software. It's not perfect, but it sure looks like it'll help us bring the money in a week faster across the board. That's $1 million a month in accelerated receivables, and that way I can keep my job as the accounts receivable manager, right? Consumer products are mostly sold because they fill needs. Usually those needs start with health, sex, and love, which is probably defined 1/3 of the websites on the planet at this point, right? But it expands to need, like if you think about Facebook, it does, occasionally it helps with, sex and love, but mostly it's the need to be connected and the need to brag and the need to stay interactive with your friends. It's not a sort of urgent need, but it's an important need. That's why they have 1 billion users, right? Because everybody wants to see somebody else's puppy pictures and baby pictures and, vacation photos and stuff like that. But what you want to find at the beginning in your initial customer segment is the people with the greatest, most desperate need or the most urgent demand to solve the problem that you're going out to solve. So that's customer segments. The other important one, customer segments, is really number one, although you'll get help in figuring it out working on box number 2, value proposition. Value proposition, the heart of value proposition is the product. What's the product? What are the features? What are the benefits? How does it do whatever it does? Product, product, product. But beyond product, it's a bunch of other stuff. How is this product different from all its competitors? Is it faster, slower, better, cheaper, bigger, smaller, whatever? Where does it fit in the competitive universe, and why should a customer reach for your product instead of Oracle's product or Sybase's product, or actually Oracle bought Sybase, never mind, Oracle's product or Microsoft's product or whatever. It also includes, what's your vision for this product? Is the product going to be what you're going to build first, or is it one of 20 apps that all help improve your life or improve your business performance or your athletic performance or other kinds of performance? And a couple of other things. The next box is the channel. How am I going to get the stuff from me to the customer? Do I need a direct sales force? Can I sell it at Walmart? Can I sell it online? Do I need to sell it at Amazon, or can I sell it on my own site? How am I going to get my stuff to my customers? Because I have to sell it where customers want to buy it, right? It's got to be where the customer expects to find it. Otherwise, they're not going to go looking for it there. When was the last time you shopped for perfume at a gas station or gasoline in a ladies' lingerie shop? Not likely to happen. And then the most important of, not the most important, the most important, number 3, customer relationships. Osterwalder, being a PhD scholarly type, defined customer relationships as how do you keep them happy and keep them loving you and coming back for more. Steve and I, as basically sales and marketing types, said that's not it at all. Customer relationships is about the 3 fundamental jobs of any business: get customers, keep customers, and grow customers. In fact, I had a conversation just before I came in here with 2 very bright young guys, the incubator at MSU. And they said, well, we're pretty sure our customer acquisition cost is 30% of sales. And I said, well, how do you know that? Well, it's a combination of, Google ads and natural search and PR and this and that and the other thing, and that's going to be 30% of our revenue. And that, to me, with all due respect to these bright young guys, that to me says 2 things. One, aha, they have the venture capital disease. They've got to put a number in there. They've got to put a credible number in there for the venture capitalists, or they won't get any money, right? So that's something of a fairy tale. The other thing is it's something that it's so easy to test and prove by running some test ads and seeing if anybody comes, seeing if anybody clicks on, yes, I'd be interested in buying your thing. Find out before, because the one thing that is as sure as I am standing here is if there's one cost that puts more startups out of business than any other 5 costs, it's the cost of customer acquisition. If they're off by 3 or 5 or 6%, that's fine. But my sense of trying to sell something in the online world today in the clutter and chaos of online marketing is they could be off by 100%. And in that case, they would pretty much lose money on every single sale. And as the old comedians used to say, that's okay, they'll make it up on volume, which doesn't obviously translate very well, but I like it. So the first step is figuring out the customer and the value proposition. And the value proposition you should think of as the contract you're offering your customer. Madam Customer, if you give me money, I will give you this. You know, the best recipes in the history of mankind, the best ways to advance your career, the best way to find a husband, lover, mistress, mister, you know, whatever. And this is my contract to you. And the reason you should sign this contract is because I'm better than alternative A, cheaper than alternative B, faster than alternative C, smarter than alternative D. And when you get a customer who says, I will take that contract, you have reached step one on the long staircase to startup success. You've reached what a guy named Mark Andreessen, the founder of Netscape, first labeled product market fit, right? Your value proposition is your product, your market is your customer. And when you get the two of them in sync, you are on a giant, important first step to startup success. The odds of you getting there on the very first try or the second try or even the fifth try are very, very, very low. And this is where sort of dogged persistence and willing to work hard, those kinds of ingredients in successful entrepreneurs are critically, critically important. But once you get there, you need to get to step two, which is really getting all four of those upper right-hand boxes working together to the point where you are starting to drown in customers, where customers are calling you rather than you calling them, where you're starting to see some real sparks fly. And you should do everything you can do to spend as little money as you can until you get to that point, because you're a startup. You don't have a lot of money, which sort of makes it a little bit easier, number one. And number two, when you spend that money without having figured this stuff out first, you're going to run out of money very quickly, and one of two things are going to happen. The investors are going to fire you, or they are going to give you more money by taking most of your equity away. It's what we call a down round or a crush round, where, well, gee, you can either go out of business or take our money in exchange for half of your company. Well, you already own 20% of our company. Well, yeah, well, you're going to have no company if you don't take our money at this sort of horrible rate, so your choice. And so you want to get as many of these questions answered, and answered firmly, not, well, we found one customer for $5. I'm sure we can find another 1,000 that way. You want to at least do it with 10 or 20 or 50 to convince yourself that when you start spending money, the money's going to generate customers, because otherwise it's going to generate termination or death or worse. So when you get those four boxes working, you're really at step two. You have the beginning of a robust business model. You've found a way, you know who your customer is, you know how to find him, you know how to get the merchandise to him or to her, and they know what they're buying and they're excited about it, okay? That is really the core step two on the road or the staircase to startup success. And it doesn't happen in the first or the second or the third try. Most of the time you get your head beat in. You go out and you call on 20 customers and 5 of them aren't there when you show up for the meeting. Another 5 of them are barely staying awake for your presentation. 5 or 6 or 7 say, oh yeah, that's interesting, call me when it's ready, yeah, I might want to buy it. That's hardly the kind of enthusiasm you need to commit 20,000 hours of your life to building a startup. 20,000 hours of your life is sort of the minimum down payment on startup success. 5 years, 80 hours a week. And if you're not ready to commit that, I would encourage you to tune up your resume and send it to all the banks in town and send it to Gazprom and Lukoil and some other big companies, because you will have a much happier life. And what I always try to remind my students is, yeah, the Google guys made billions, and Mark Zuckerberg made billions. He also lost billions. And there are lots of great stories in the media about startup bazillionaires who started with nothing but an idea and a lot of hard work and luck and made many, many millions or billions of dollars. But for every one of those stories, there were 1,000 startups that went nowhere because they didn't have passionate, excited customers, right? Mark Zuckerberg never dreamed of making a lot of money. He never dreamed of dog pictures and baby pictures and stuff like that on the Facebook, which it was originally called. He started Facebook with a totally different value proposition. It was all about how did the geeky guys at Harvard get dates with the cute girls. And that's all it was. You had to have a harvard.edu email address to use Facebook. And some of the geeky guys got some dates. I guess he even got a few dates. And then they sort of let it out to some other schools in Boston and to some other schools around the country. It still wasn't really a business. It still was the digital version of the Facebooks most of us had in college, where you could figure out who was that girl in my English class 3 rows up by, staring at the book for about a half hour, and then you could work up the courage to call her and she'd say, you? No, thank you. Right? And only when they removed the EDU requirement for sign-ups to Facebook did the business explode and turn into the billion-user business it is today. And the Facebook story isn't over yet. They still haven't really figured out how to make any money or any significant money for a billion-user site, but they have enough talent and enough money working on the problem where you could bet pretty heavily that they'll figure it out, before too long. But the other way to think about the business model is that basically from here over is all you need to worry about for the first 2 years. That's the customer-facing side of the business model. It's everything that involves your customers, because for the first couple of years, what you need to get to is customer nirvana, where you're almost beating them off with sticks, or where you are sensing a steadily increasing drumbeat of customer enthusiasm for your value proposition, your pricing, and so forth. And the top box in the middle with the heart, you have figured out not only who your customers are, but how are you going to get them cost effectively? If you're selling $10 software, what can you spend? $1, maybe $2, right? If you've got a mobile app, you say, oh, all I have to do is get on the App Store and my job is done. Well, being in the App Store, along with, I think the latest number is 650,000 other apps, is like being in the biggest supermarket you've ever been in the back corner on the bottom shelf with the lights out above the shelf. It's you, maybe you sold it to the supermarket, but the supermarket's not going to pay you till they sell it to the customer, and it's entirely your job as the entrepreneur to get the customer to figure out where in hell in that supermarket your can of peas is. Remember to push their cart to that corner, squat down on their knees, pick it up and put it in the basket and take it home. So being in the App Store is almost a non-achievement. You can celebrate and you can have a nice party and you can pat your team on the back, when you are just on the dark bottom shelf in some huge supermarket with 650,000 items. I think the average superstore has 100,000 items. So think of the biggest supermarket you've ever been in, multiply by 6, and you are one little item somewhere in that supermarket, and the cost of getting customers to find your item, to remember to find it when they're in the store, and to buy it is all on you. And we have seen more and hundreds of startups just crippled by that customer acquisition cost, because somewhere in the business plan they said, oh, we can buy clicks to our website for $2. But what they don't talk about is, yeah, we can buy the clicks for $2, and every 50 customers who clicks will give us our email address. For every 20 email addresses we get, we will get a customer. So their customer acquisition cost isn't $2, it's $1,000, right? You need 500 $2 clicks until anybody gives you any money. Now, if you're selling jet airplanes, that math works just fine. If you're selling bicycles, you can probably get away with it. But if you're selling 99 or 39 or $3.99 software, you are out of business. And so you have to be thinking about this as early as you possibly can. So you've finished this 2-hour exercise of developing your business model that I probably just spent 2 hours talking about. The one reason, I guess, that PowerPoint is good is it keeps the speaker organized and moving, because he has a sort of compulsion to keep clicking the button. But I think I'm doing okay. What time do you want to throw me out of here?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay. Okay. So let me talk just briefly then about the customer development process, right? There are 4 official steps to the customer development process, but we abandoned step 3 and 4 about 2 years ago when we found, and we, between us, Steve and I, probably see up close 2,000 or 3,000 startups a year. So you see the patterns, you see the results of people doing customer discovery and not doing customer discovery. So forget steps 3 and 4. I'm going to talk about step 1, customer discovery. 4 steps to step 1. The first is get this right. Step 2, get out of the building. Get out of the building and talk to customers about this sketch you've made. Don't walk box by box. What do you think of our value proposition? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? The first time you go out of the building, you don't talk about the product at all. All you talk about, let's say if your product is accounts receivable software, is, hi, we understand you're a smart chief of accounts receivable at XYZ company. We'd just like to talk to you about the problems you have, about how you collect your money promptly and timely and in an organized fashion, what products you're using, what products you like, what products you don't like, and what are the things that keep you up at night. What you really want to ask is, what are the things that make you worry about whether you're going to get fired? Because that's the kind of motivation that's going to get somebody interested in your product. Now, the bad news is you're all entrepreneurs, which means, okay, I'm going to see a customer. I want to sell. That's my job. I'm an entrepreneur. The first rule of customer discovery is no selling. You want to have fluid, peer-to-peer, easy conversations with customers where you guarantee to them up front that they'll never see a product presentation and they'll never see an order pad. You want to understand their problems as they view them and understand which ones are really, hair on fire, pants on fire kinds of problems, and which ones are, I don't really worry about that too much, because you want to make sure that your product is moving into a potentially very exciting market where people are going to grab the product out of your hands. And you're going to do that 2 or 3 times, because the first time, some of them are going to fall asleep, some of them are going to yawn, and the likelihood of you finding overwhelming customer enthusiasm for solving a problem the first time you go out is really close to zero. So you're going to learn a lot, you're going to come back to the office, you're going to rethink the problem you're solving. Maybe you're solving accounts receivable problems for people who pay in cash. Maybe you're solving accounts receivable problems for collecting money from big corporations or from small businesses. Maybe your customer segment is wrong and it should be people who don't have time to really do it because they have too small an accounting department and you want to automate it for small accounting departments. And the more you can do to refine the problem you're solving, the more likely you are to find customers who are excited about it. So you go out there, you get your head beat in a little bit. When you start to hear consistently from customers, this is a problem, this is a real problem for me, then and only then do you move forward and think about or begin to talk about the product. You know, hey, Vladimir, you told me that you had this problem with collecting from big companies. We've developed some software that we think will help collect money from big companies. Could we talk about it a little bit? I promise you I am not here to sell it. In fact, it's not even built yet. In fact, I don't even have the product. It doesn't exist. What I have is the other key to customer development success. It's called the MVP, the minimum viable product. In some way, somehow, I have given you a feel for what my product is and what it does and how it works. In the case of Vladimir and the accounts receivable tool, it might be as simple as 5 or 6 consecutive non-working screens. Who are you trying to collect from? And you have a list of the customers. So the Gazprom is lit up. And then it goes, Gazprom, here are the people we know. Here's the one you called to nag last time. Here's the one who's most responsive. Click on the one you'd like to contact. And now that lights up. But that doesn't light up. It just is already lit up because it's a non-working demo, the kind of thing you could create in PowerPoint before you go to bed tonight. Then you advance to slide number 3. Here are the Gazprom people. I've now clicked on so-and-so. You know, here's a letter you could send him. Here's an email you could send him. Here's a greeting card you could send him. Here's his phone number and a suggested script for what you ought to say. And then you can continue through this process, 8 or 10 non-working screens that provide a representation of what your product can do for Vladimir. It doesn't work, you can't buy it, but it makes the conversation about the product and its ability to solve the problem so much more powerful than a conversation, than a sales pitch, than a PowerPoint slide. If you're doing a web or mobile product, build a 3 or 5 page website, real simple, not a lot of flash, not a lot of design, and see if people come there, see if they give you their email address, see if they refer others to your site, and see if those others refer others. You're looking for enthusiasm. And only when you begin to get that enthusiasm do you begin to get the sense that you've got a business. And so when you complete all of that in it, and I just gave you the sort of highlights of customer discovery, and you've done some rough math. Well, it's going to cost me this to get a customer. It's going to cost me approximately this to build and send her the product. I think she's going to pay me this. That would mean that I'd have some money left over. That's pretty good. That's all I need to know. We have, in the book, we talk a lot about what I've come to call survival math. It's like very rough cash flow analysis, because when you're this early in your startup and you're still trying to figure it out, P&Ls, balance sheets, accruals just don't matter because you're not going to live long enough for those accruals to matter. And what matters is how much is left in the checkbook and how fast can I move through this process and learn and change my product and change my marketing, change my channel, change my pricing until I see that customer momentum start to happen. I have enjoyed this several times in my career, probably 5 or 6 times in total. Once where we switched a company from face-to-face selling to telemarketing. We went from closing 8 or 10 deals a month to closing 20 or 30, then to 50, then to more. That company grew so quickly that I guess now about 3 years ago, Goldman Sachs, a small company you may have heard of, invested almost $100 million in the company at 15 times the previous round pricing. That company today is doing about 90 million in revenue, about 15 in profit, has 15 in the bank, and is keeping that money for the big bash at the IPO, which is probably still a year or 18 months away. But they got their product market fit right much earlier, and they changed their customer acquisition strategy without touching the product. They changed the way they got their customers and drove the speed of that up and the cost of it down as the price of the product was coming down because competitors were driving the price down. The other time this happened to me was even more fun. It was in my last startup, this one-to-one company where I met Steve, where a little funny thing happened about a year after we started the company. This thing called the internet arrived when Al Gore invented it, right? And we were the sort of leaders in the field of how do you use data and interactivity together to do personal marketing, because databases were just getting more affordable and more ubiquitous. And we were talking for the first year about personalized faxes, about call centers, about personalized direct mail, because that was all the personalized marketing that was available. All of a sudden, there it was, the internet and email. And we got so many sales inquiries from Fortune 1000 companies that we stopped going on sales calls. What are you, crazy? You're supposed to be an entrepreneur. You stopped going on sales calls? Well, we found that our close rate was only 1 in 3, and we were so busy servicing the business we had that we changed the rules for a sales call. We couldn't tell on the phone whether they were tire kickers or serious buyers. You just couldn't figure it out after more tries and more trips to the middle of the country than you want to remember. So we said, okay, here are the 2 ways we make sales calls because we're just too busy. Number 1, you come to our office, we'll be glad to spend 2 hours with you anytime. We don't care if you're in Moscow or Cleveland or California, come to our office, we'll talk to you. Or you pay us our very high daily consulting rate. We'll come out and spend a day with you. You pay our travel and expense. And if you hire us, we'll take all of that off the bill. If you don't hire us, we'll expect you to pay it because, sorry, we're just too busy to have nice conversations. And we were still drowning in customer inquiries. And that business went from a cocktail napkin and $1 in revenue to 450 people and $45 million in revenue in under 7 years. It was just really fun. And it's the kind of fun that comes from really doing your homework at the beginning of your startup before you've built your product. It's the kind of fun I wish on each and every one of you. And that's the story with 1 slide. That could be another Silicon Valley record. So we have some time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. One, two, 1, 2. Does that work?
Yep.
Does this one work?
Oh, I need a thing, though.
Микрофон нет? Слышно? Хорошо.
I can hear him all right, if anybody's wondering.
before everybody kicks in. I'll do the first. I was a sales, marketing, and PR guy for like 3 startups myself, and your talk just proves everything I've learned. I was selling a product like half a year before we actually had a beta, and that was quite a fun experience developing the customer base. And the stuff like you say, like MVP and all those acronyms, that does sound like a business school professor talk to me now. But also, my experience from manufacturing startups tells me that actually at some stage you do have to come to financial planning, when you're about to invest, $100, $200, $300 million into manufacturing. When do you think does that stage come?
Well, for raw startups, as opposed to startups that are building, monster manufacturing plants, the simple answer is it comes as late as you possibly can delay it. Because the further you are along in proving who your customers are, how you're going to get them, what the product's going to be, what it's going to take to build it, the more equity you preserve for yourselves as the entrepreneurs, because you've taken more and more risk out of the business for the investor. Nobody's going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in a capital goods plant, first of all, to young entrepreneurs who haven't done it before, and secondly, not without a very detailed proof of concept, some kind of beta customer experience and proof, and a very detailed financial plan. And in my experience, almost nobody invests $300–400 million in anything anymore unless it's along the lines of a biotech cure for cancer kind of thing where there's a multi-billion-dollar market just waiting for you, and there you don't need to do customer development at all because you know exactly who the customers are. The health organizations put out the statistics on how many customers you have, and if your invention can change the lives of those people, they'll have no problem borrowing, stealing, or getting from their insurance company the money to buy your product. So at least in the 1990s, investors were still like, drunks in a casino throwing tens and occasionally hundreds of millions of dollars at new ideas. I don't see an awful lot of that anymore. So.
Так, у нас был вопрос в 3-м ряду.
Hi, my name is Ilya, and first of all, I would like to thank you and Steve for the great job you are doing, because it's really awesome and it's inspiring. And I have 2 questions, actually. In my humble opinion, the biggest sin of entrepreneur is fear of fail, of crowd, of first customer. And my first question is, what's your opinion about the biggest sin of entrepreneur? And the second is, what is your biggest fear, and how do you fight it?
Interesting question. The biggest sin of entrepreneurs is also their biggest asset. It's incredible self-confidence. I'm an entrepreneur. I run through walls. I walk through flame. My job is to get this done. I figure it out. I'm an entrepreneur. And that serves you incredibly well in the dark days of your startup, which you will always have. It's the confidence that gets you through. It helps you create what Steve loves to call a reality distortion field about how great this is going to be and how rich we're all going to be. And that's why you should come work for my startup at 1/3 the salary you could get up the street at Apple or Microsoft. So in those senses, self-confidence and assuredness are a fabulous asset. On the other hand, they tend to give the entrepreneur sort of a set of blinders, like a horse, or maybe you don't listen to the customers. It was one of the great Eric Ries quotes of all time was in a company where he was a very junior guy, and he recommended that they do some market research. he was basically told, you know, officially, well, no, we don't really believe in market research. The results are never very reliable. And then he was talking about it with some of the people at the company, and he said, well, with our management, what could the customers actually tell us other than that we were right? That would be the only thing we would listen to. And that's sort of the sin of entrepreneurship. And I would say, to be honest, that was probably my greatest weakness. I go to work knowing we were going to have a week where we lost $10,000, and I wasn't going to worry about it, even if there was $40,000 or $50,000 left in the bank and no more credit at the bank, because I was going to figure it out. And most of the time I did. You know, I sort of have a couple of those vests I talked about. You know, had more than a few $1 million wipeouts and more than a few big successes, and somehow on average it worked out. And the way entrepreneurs can best conquer that, which is very hard to get people comfortable doing here in Russia, is to have at least one co-founder, someone who shares significantly in the equity, not 3 or 5%, and someone who is sort of your alter ego. I had one of these in each of my more successful startups, somebody who wasn't a friend, didn't come to the company as a friend. In fact, the best one came to the company as a very junior employee. And if I put together a forecast that said this is what we're going to do for the next 6 months, his forecast would be half of that, and he'd be saying, who are we going to fire, how are we going to cut costs? And I'd be saying, who are we going to hire at the same time? But since I was the 80% owner, I got the vote, and when we had to bail it out, we'd figure out how to bail it out. So I think it's very uncommon in Russia for entrepreneurs to be willing to take on a major co-founder, and it can be the best counterbalance to the worst sin of entrepreneurship, I think.
Could not agree more.
Okay, Bob, thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. You have been 4 times, as I see you here, I mean in Moscow, with open lectures. Every time you talk about the same, that the small company, the startup, is not a copy of a big company in terms of business process. But yesterday, on the seminar from Russian venture company, we have heard that big companies, well, the question was, what do you want to see as your partner from startup? They said that we want to see small copy of our big company in terms of business process. This means that it helps them to cooperate more easily. How we can overcome this gap?
Well, you know, ice cream companies make, 3 or 6 or 10 flavors, and they do that because different people have different opinions or tastes. And I think that, the one interesting market here in Russia that has had some real success is the clone market, where you take a good idea, usually from the United States or sometimes from China, and say, wow, this doesn't exist in our market, let's just do what they do and make a business out of it. And most of the it helps you in many ways because you're starting with a bunch of knowns, right? You know what the product is, you know what the customer response is like, you know how to find the customers and things like that. And all you have to do is adjust it for local market conditions. Like I was up in Kiev on my last trip for a couple of days working with startups at an incubator. In Kiev, only 20% of the entire country has a bank card or a credit card, and half or more than half of those consider it as an emergency use only. That's basically a cash economy. So if you copy Amazon.com in Ukraine, you could go very broke very fast because only, in that case, 8 or 10% of the entire country would ever do business with you and so on. And even there's an even greater fear of online use of credit cards, so it might be 5% of the entire country. Cloning big Russian companies, how are you going to, deliver gas to consumers better than Gazprom, or do a better job as a very small bank than a very big bank, unless you are doing some truly innovative things. So I'm not sure I understand that, the motivation behind that comment. It may be, sort of the horrible rule in Silicon Valley is that almost all of the money goes to white males who went to Ivy League universities, because that's who's got the money. And they do pattern matching. In other words, 5 years ago, it only went to white males from Ivy League schools. And so the successes are, 5 years later, are all from white males from Ivy League schools, because investors say, well, gee, I've invested in 5, companies all led by white males from Ivy League schools. Why stop now? I don't care how good this lady's idea is or this black man's idea is. It's a really horrible, unspoken shame of Silicon Valley. And so maybe what you're hearing is an investor who likes to invest in things he knows, because he knows the patterns and the predictability of those things, and good for him. He would have laughed when Mark Zuckerberg walked in with Facebook, or when Sergey Brin walked in with Google and things like that, but he may still get a very nice return for his investors. I think if you are truly a passionate, insane entrepreneur, you not only want to do something that will hopefully make you money, you want to do something that's really important and makes a difference. And so another bank or oil company or coal extracting company might not be as exciting as doing, lots of other things.
Здравствуйте, Боб. Меня зовут Даниил.
Hello, Bob. My name is Daniel. First off, it's a great pleasure for me. It's a great pleasure for me to see you here today. I've had an experience launching my own business. I didn't have any problems whatsoever with the product or customer acquisition. Sales happened just like that, but my problem was very different. My problem was in communications with my partner. What do you think of partnership in general? And how do you essentially choose the right partner? Thank you.
Interesting, very important, difficult question. I think there are a couple of sort of Bob rules to at least think about. First, there's no such thing as a successful 50-50 partnership, again, in my opinion. Somebody's got to be the boss. Somebody's got to have the final say, which can mean 51-49. But there's somebody who's got once in a while say, you're my partner, I love you, I think the world of you, but we're going to the left. So that's rule number one. Rule number two, try your hardest not to be partners with a good friend or a bedmate, because all the decisions will be massaged and smoothed to make sure you don't hurt, offend, or whatever the other partner. And number three, don't choose your partner in a hurry. Get to know the person. Most of my partners grew up in the ranks of my company. When we sold my first company, a guy who owned 34% of it, and I'll never let him live this down, when he started work for me, he was making $200 a week. And from the day he showed up in the very bottom of the ladder job, he treated that company like it was his own. He worked his butt off, and he was always reliable and hardworking, and he went up through the ranks quickly and started earning stock more quickly than anybody else. We were never really friends. In fact, I have fairly sharp elbows, and I made a lot of decisions he didn't like. And And now it's a lot of years, but it took about 5 years after we sold the company and I left first for somehow all the dust to clear. And now a couple times a year we go out to dinner, we go out to drinks, and I made him a wealthy man. So, I mean, he made a huge contribution to it, but joining me and earning partnership in my company made him a wealthy man, and he earned every penny he got. But I remember about 5 years after I made him a partner, my wife and I finally decided, let's not make believe we're friends with Alex and his wife anymore, so we don't have to go to our annual 5-hour Christmas dinner. And somehow we let it slip off the calendar because it was a working partnership with lots of disagreements and things like that. Two other thoughts. One is, particularly in early company, get an advisor or a mentor who can maybe be something of a referee. Think of it as an investor who didn't put any money in but put some time in and only really wants you to succeed. And having that person in some meetings. I did that for a while with a guy I basically paid by the day when my Alex and I weren't getting along that well. Once a month, we had him come down, fly down from Vermont for a day. He had run a business similar to ours and retired. I liked him, he liked me, he respected Alex, and he would sit in on our sort of mud wrestling matches and, blow a whistle like a referee. Calm down, this isn't that bad, let's talk about it some more. So find some kind of a buffer to help you through those situations. And the other thing I would say is, if it's horrible, buy them out. If it's really horrible, get rid of them. You've got to love what you're doing when you're working as hard as you are to build a successful business. And if one of your biggest problems is someone you can get rid of, never too late, so.
Hello, Bob. My name is Vitaly. Piggybacking on the previous question, I would like you to explore an adjacent subject. Shall we talk about the relationship between the venture capitalists and the startup entrepreneur? I have a problem. I had a startup myself about 2 years ago when there were fires in Moscow. And that was the time of this influencer ado. So both the investor and myself realized that in order for me to pull off the project, we needed a very special resource. And we came to the following agreement. Had I told him about my idea, the idea would no longer be protected. He understood that very well, so he told me, if this is a trust issue between us, you can try developing a small batch of your product, and then we just test it out. And if it works, I will invest. And he even suggested he invested $10,000, which was not much, but was enough. And this venture investor is, by the way, a large-size retail. Actually, the name is X5 Retail Group. They are quoted on New York Stock Exchange, I think. So I agreed to that. I spent quite some time. I found the people. I developed prototypes, which I showed to him. He told me, Vitaly, we're friends, and I've known him for quite some time. If we adopt this idea, then your project will be launched in 2 weeks. But, as your friend, I have to warn you, you will be left outside the boat. I'm sorry, essentially, we shall just steal your idea. This is how the company operates. So you make your choice from now on. So if it is an idea that it is so easy for the investor to implement himself, how do you protect yourself as an entrepreneur? Thank you. I'm sorry, it must have been a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a rather complicated question. I'm not sure I have the answer to.
Here's the mic.
Sorry? Okay, I'm not sure.
I appreciate it.
Good answer for you. I think sort of obvious. It starts with know who's your investor and so forth. Most of the time, these things come down to ability to execute. Ideas are easy. They're easy to come by. They're easy to talk about. They're easy to write business plans and business models about. And 90% of the success of a startup comes from execution. And so, I don't know what to tell you in that particular situation, but I think I might have just grabbed everything off the table, walked out of the room, and, just tried to get into that business as quickly as I possibly could, or perhaps consider physical violence along the way. But it's too complicated a question to really give you much of a wise answer to, although other than a wise ass answer that I just gave you. The key thing is it's not all about the money. Is the investor going to be a good partner, not just during good times, but in tough times? Are they going to support you as the entrepreneur? Or are they just looking to how much stock can I squeeze out? And boy, if they miss a quarter or they miss a, sort of benchmark, I'm going to own so much of this, and, too bad for the entrepreneur, they didn't perform. And so in many ways, for you to be able to pick and choose your investor, your company has to be really performing. I've had a few that were in these wonderful bidding wars, and you could really say, so you're going to steal my idea, you're going to do, you have more freedom when the company's really performing. And so that's really the best thing you can do.
You're talking of drinking vodka in threes and using physical violence. You do have a good feeling for the Russian environment. Еще вопросы?
More questions, guys? Bob, you've been part of so many projects, and I understand some of them went belly up. So had you had another chance, would you like them to go belly up again, thinking that this was an important lesson to learn? Or would you rather find a different route? Thank you.
Well, I would have liked them all to be worth $100 million, not just one, but one or two of them were really, one of them, I talked earlier about this gentleman's question, my worst sin is my self-confidence. I can buy that, fix it, and turn it around and flip it in a year or two. And I made two that went to zero, or not to zero, but close enough, by that sort of ridiculous self-confident decision with no advisors and no outside money. I think the easiest way to answer that is, like my best friend is a career CFO. He runs finance and operations for a $100 million business based in New York City. He's been there 10 years. He's had 3 jobs in 40 years. He thinks I'm out of my mind. That I've had 7 companies, been involved with 20 others. My resume looks like the dog crapped on it or something, because I never really thought about a resume. And I think the easiest way to answer your question is, if I look back at my decision at age 22 to quit this wonderful job at one of the biggest companies in the world, and saying to myself, God, I couldn't have done that for 40 years, and I switched instead to 40 years of Mickey or Mr. Toad's wild ride. Incredible highs, occasional incredible lows, bouncing around like a ping pong ball. Personally, I wouldn't have traded it for anything. And I think, sure, I would have loved every one of them to go to the moon, but, that just doesn't happen. I'd love to still be 12 years old on the outside as well as the inside, but that doesn't happen either. And I think, it's just important to recognize 2 things at your, relatively young ages, certainly compared to me as entrepreneurs. One is There are far easier career paths, far, far easier, still demanding, challenging jobs. And the other is the odds are overwhelming that if you go to work at a big company today and you're smart and you work hard for 40 years, you will do better financially than you're going to do in the startup entrepreneurial route, because the ups and downs are everywhere, and not everybody's Mark Zuckerberg, and not everybody's fourth startup automatically is the one that makes them many millions of dollars. And so you have to have passion and self-confidence and incredible endurance to follow this path. And if you do it for a year or two, it still looks great on a resume, and people at big companies will welcome your experience. But if you're doing it because you can't find a job and you got to do something, I would say look harder for that real job, because this is a very different, path in your life, full of exploding landmines and things like that, and full of great satisfying rewards. In fact, we're probably about to end. I'm going to tell you about the best reward ever. When we cashed out of company number 7, I like to do companies where everybody who's been there more than a year and has an outstanding performance review in their file has a little bit of equity in the company, so that if something happens, they make money. And when we took this last company to the next stage, the point where longer story I won't go into, where I decided to leave, the investors who came in forced us to get rid of $30 million in stock that we had in the closet. And the formula that distributed that stock gave me a very nice pile of money. But the most memorable moment was when we had a woman, Corliss Brown, who had been with us for 8 years and was the receptionist. She was a single mother of 3, lived in the ghetto of Stamford, Connecticut, and worked 25 hours a week at Home Depot in addition to working full-time for us. I handed this woman a check for $44,000. It was a year and a half of her salary. She gave me, there was a scream, and she gave me a hug that I think broke about half of my ribs. And that was, was one of the proudest moments in 41 years of doing this sort of stuff, and I sadly haven't seen her but 2 or 3 times again, but I still remember the hug. So, yeah.
Последний вопрос возьмем.
It's gonna be last question. Bob, what's your global vision? What's the superordinate goal of your life, in other words? And do you have any personal business in Moscow? Anything special, or do you just talk about the book?
Well, that one's easier to answer. I have no business in Moscow other than teaching at Skolkovo a couple of times a year. And I don't know what my goal is in life, to be honest. I've really only been teaching at Columbia Business School for about a year, and I find that really satisfying. And I've been teaching, lecturing, things like this for about 2 years, and I can't believe that people actually pay me to do this. It's so, delightful to talk to and hopefully give new ideas to entrepreneurs. But I have a 2-year-old granddaughter I'd like to know even better than I know her, and a bicycle that's I used to ride 150 miles a week, that since I hooked up with Steve 3 years ago, it's not doing so well. So I think I'd like to, I told you all have to work 80 or 100 hours a week. I'd like to cut that down to something, slacker, like 50 or 60 in another couple of years. And I don't know. But thanks for asking.
Bob, what do you think of the questions we had today?
Questions are amazing. Better than the lecture, I think, but...
Yeah, I had that feeling too. Okay.
You're not supposed to agree with that.
No. That's why I asked the question. I thought the questions from the audience were amazing.
Yeah.
Всем спасибо.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we've taken good care of the questions. Over the next 10 minutes, guys from Alpina will be selling the book, and then we shall have another 40-minute discussion with Boba soon.
For a start. Вы можете стать те, кто вопросы задавали в прошлой сессии?
Could all the askers of questions now stand up? Because now it's dark, you know, it will be difficult for us. Anybody else ask questions? Is that it? I see 4 now. And we've got 3 books.
You have to choose 3 out of 4.
Oh, I'm choosing.
You're choosing, yeah, you're the man.
Where is the 22-year-old vision question? So we're sitting somewhere over there. Okay, there's one, I think. The,
Do you want them to remind what their questions were? What?
we almost have to.
Random? Ah, good. They're ready to give out 4 books. Okay. Okay, we'll give out 4 books. Good.
Yeah, one of them says, I was about to buy myself this book. I was already reaching for my purse.
He's going to grow up an entrepreneur. Right? Yeah. Yeah, we should have done that afterwards, right? Okay, Bob, I think we're going to be just chatting in English just between the 3 of us for now. So you're not going to need that. Actually, I wanted to ask maybe a few personal questions because everybody can read the business part in the book. Well, I don't know if you don't mind that. You know, I was surprised for the first 25 minutes you were talking about Steve Blank, and in the end you said enough about Bob Dorf. So I guess Steve has made a pretty big impact in your life, right? Or what does that mean? Can you use the mic so everybody hears the translation?
Okay. So, life with Steve. I don't know where to begin. I mean, we, for I guess 10 years before we shook hands to write the book, we were just mostly social friends, and like guys usually do, particularly if their wives are around, they talk about business. Neither one of us has any interest in sports on television, so we can't tell you who even played in the Super Bowl last year or who's likely to play in January or February, I guess it is. And when we shook hands to write this book together, I think the first thing we didn't realize, I mean, that there were probably 300 debates in, well, how does a startup do this? But what if it's a social media startup? What if it's a e-commerce startup? How do you, and most of these debates happened in my California office, which is one of the most beautiful remote offices I've ever had. It's his 30,000 square foot home on 750 acres on the Pacific Ocean. So if you've got to go someplace to go to work, it's a pretty nice hotel. And we would sit in these two big comfortable chairs by the fireplace, face to face. And the problem was these were two sort of, you know, war-torn entrepreneurs, both of whom were always sure they were never wrong. And it led to some, you know, serious raging battles and things like that over things that we hope made it a better book. And I don't know, he and Steve is a, you know, his attitude about entrepreneurship is you never take your eyes off the top of the mountain for a second. And we both have sort of funny work habits. He works usually till 3 o'clock in the morning, which is 6 o'clock in California, which is 6 o'clock New York time, and I live in, not in New York, but in Connecticut on the same time zone. And I can't tell, we probably 100 times had collisions on email where he's sending me emails as he's going to bed, and I'm writing back at, at the same second in the middle of the night for him. And the other thing which actually drove me crazy is our styles are somewhat different. Steve was writing sort of trying to summarize his life's work in this book, or his, the last 12 years of his life's work, and I was trying to get the damn thing done. And I think this is the only book in the history of publishing that had the preface rewritten 9 times, because he's an absolute perfectionist, which I both love and hate at the same time. But every time he would say, I think chapter 9 is kind of upside down. Let's print out every page, put it on the floor of the living room, and walk back and forth and read it together. And I'd say, oh crap, I finished chapter 9 7 times. Do we really need to do this again? And the son of a gun would always find a twist or a change or a better way to do something. And so I got tired of being sort of cranky with his perfectionism, because it always made the book better.
Is that a good trait for an entrepreneur?
To a point. I think for an entrepreneur who is trying to give a gift of his life's work to millions of entrepreneurs around the world, it's a wonderful trait. I don't recall him being quite that perfection-oriented when he was building his company at warp speed, because I don't think you can afford that luxury in a startup. You're always dealing with imperfect data sets and never enough information, and you're making decisions, sometimes faster than you ideally would, because you are racing the money clock or the delivery clock or the client clock or whatever. But I think when you're trying, the thing that made us the proudest, normally it takes a university 18 to 24 months to adopt a textbook because first the professor has to write the syllabus, then he has to get it approved by the dean, then he or she has to, publish the syllabus, and students have to enroll. And 60 universities around the world that we know of, which probably means there were 70 or 80, were teaching startup, strategy or, startup formation courses in September of this year, 6 months after the book came out. And that probably means it'll be in 120, by this time next year. And that, I think, it's just, incredibly satisfying kind of thing that people, younger than my daughter will be using my work and Steve's to build better startups, for quite some time.
How old is your daughter?
My daughter's 32, and she's by far the, probably took the most seed capital of any startup, but she's by far given me the greatest return and pride. She recently completed her doctoral thesis. Her name is Rachel, by the way. Got a PhD in psychology, is now a practicing psychologist, and almost as important as all that achievement, a little over 2 years ago, she made me a grandfather, which is her first startup. And that reminds me that you can't always work 80 hours a week. In fact, it was very funny a couple of weeks ago. In fact, before I was leaving for Moscow on the last trip, I sort of told my wife I had to work all weekend to clear everything out before I left for what turned out to be 22 days. And this has nothing to do with entrepreneurship. It's just one of my favorite recent stories. Bear with me for about one more minute. My daughter heard that Grandpa was going to work all weekend, and at 9:30 on Saturday morning, when I'm having my coffee and sitting by the fire with my wife, the phone rings, and it's my daughter. My daughter never calls me at 9:30 on Saturdays. Her eyes are barely open. I answered the phone, and it was 2-year-old little Maya, who had obviously been rehearsed, said, "Grandpa, take me to the zoo." So there went my Saturday work plan. Somehow the work got done anyway, and it reminded me that, as a retired entrepreneur or a full-out entrepreneur, if you don't make room for your life, it will be one of the great losses of your life, no matter how much money you made. And we had a perfect, beautiful, sunny day at the zoo and ate chicken fingers and French fries and crap, and, just great fun.
So how do you balance all that? I mean, do you think you do that successfully now or over your lifespan?
I've never done it successfully, and I've now failed retirement 3 times. The closest I came was we actually left Connecticut, where we've lived for 30-some-odd years, got in the SUV, took the dog, and moved to our house in Colorado. And if there's one thing I love besides work and family, in the opposite order, it's skiing and drinking. And that's about all there is to do in Colorado. And my wife said she'd move out there with me and we'd try to retire as long as we brought the dog. So we brought the dog. We drove 3,000 miles or 2,500 miles across the country. And I did, the 2 other things I really love for about 4 months. And I said, nope, not for me. Too slow. You spend all your day talking to retired people about where you're going to have dinner tonight, and your whole dinner talking with retired, boring people about where you're going to ski tomorrow. And as much as the 66 days of skiing was fun that winter, I think the next time I'm going to retire is when I hear the carpenters nailing the top on the box as they're digging the hole. And that's probably more accurate picture of me than, hopefully I'll learn to work less than 80 hours a week soon.
Well, that's the spirit. Yeah, the internet says you like the Vile Resort in Colorado.
Sorry?
The internet says you like the Vile Resort in Colorado? You still
No,
stay in the same place?
I once got in my last company, I got a big consulting contract from my favorite ski resort, which is Vail. And I actually, at one point, my partner was so mad at me, like, how can you spend so many days on this lousy $100,000 engagement, that I actually got a letter from the CEO on company letterhead This will certify that Bob Dorf was in our executive offices all day with no ski clothing on. Signed, Gary Knight, CEO of Vail Resorts. I still don't think my partner believed me, but it, felt a little better.
Well, you want to ask a question or not?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah, it doesn't work now. It does, okay. So how do you like the Russian winter? And based on those, I think 5 days, 4 days, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. How do you like Moscow? How do you like founders here? How do you like entrepreneurs here?
I love the entrepreneurs here. They have a sparkle in their eye that is so important to, in the list of what makes an entrepreneur. They have a curiosity and a passion for what they're working on. And actually, I don't mind the Russian winter at all. But I really have never seen Moscow traffic as bad as I've seen it this week. Last night, we drove across Moscow for, I think, an hour and 20 minutes. The good news was I got a little nap in there. And we were only halfway to our next destination, which was actually here. And so we did what apparently people do in Moscow all the time. Park the car, get on the metro, we'll worry about the car tomorrow. Which I thought was a fairly entrepreneurial solution to a nasty problem. But the other thing is, it's nice to see the percentage of beautiful Russian women entrepreneurs. The percentage is pretty high here compared to the United States, and that, I think, is a very healthy thing. And they have the same sparkle in the eye and the same curiosity. But interesting, I don't see that quite as much in classes that I've taught. So it may be that the real entrepreneurs are here and in groups like this, where it's, as is probably appropriate for entrepreneurship, it's more about doing it than studying it, which, I don't know, I think is a healthy thing. But the one other thing I would say about working hard is I feel like a total slacker trying to keep up with this guy and Vlad, who are both running active incubators, startups, funds, 27 other things in the Russian entrepreneurial ecosystem at the same time as they've organized all these lectures and visits and conversations and things like that. So I think I am just about double your age, and I think I probably could have outrun you way back then, but it's really admirable because to see that kind of passion and energy, and we're sitting on the damn metro, and Nikolai pushes an old lady onto the floor, grabs her seat, opens his computer because he saw a little sign, Wi-Fi, on this car, and he could knock out 10 more emails and one old lady. And he didn't really knock out the old lady, she knocked him out. But and so, I mean, to me, that's the kind of look at entrepreneurial culture that gives you a real picture of what's going on here, and that I find just exciting place to be, and extremely encouraging. And I do this sometimes in some places where I have to stop and say, hello, is everybody awake? Does anybody care about what I'm talking about? Because if not, we could have a coffee break now and you don't have to listen to me anymore. And that's, none of the discussions I've done here in Moscow have paid me a dime. We've sold a few books, which doesn't pay me much more than a dime, and the satisfying part is when you get the kinds of questions I got from you people tonight, or the people that grab me in the hall and need to talk for a couple of minutes about, can you tell me what you think about this or what you think about that? That's really a very generous reward, and don't see this everywhere I go. So I thank you for your enthusiasm and your curiosity and your energy, which is just great.
The traffic jam was the feature of your visit. So for today, a couple of hours ago, I've made a few screenshots on the iPhone, and someone wrote, "Here is the Judgment Day. It finally came." So that I think that the Maya calendar says that the Judgment Day is going to be tomorrow, but
tomorrow. Oh, yeah. I'm on an airplane. That's great. Yeah. Great place to be.
Exactly. On the Judgment Day.
You got a good view.
So someone wrote on the Yandex Maps, "Here is the Judgment Day. It appeared today we're all going to die in a traffic jam."
Yeah, that's New Year's traffic in Moscow. You got to be ready for that if you're coming, 2 weeks before New Year's.
Who was it? Was it Alec? Were you telling me you were in a traffic jam for 6 hours? Somebody said that today, that the record for their personal time spent in a city of Moscow traffic jam was 6 hours.
I've seen a lot of those people. I've seen a lot of those people. One good reason I don't have a car.
We also got an interesting comment on Twitter today, one of the funniest one, when Bob said I had to get out of the building and he was like preaching the customer development. Someone in the journalist said, "Look, this guy's minus 21 on the street and this guy's saying, get out of the building?"
That was my favorite tweet of the trip. Yeah. So, I don't know. I also think, one of the things just... you may know this already, but I was very impressed to see, that Russia's major venture fund, RVC, is so supportive in its outreach to entrepreneurs. Microsoft, big, same way, big company, doesn't really need to reach out and support the entrepreneurial community. Obviously, they'd like you to build your companies on their platforms and use their software, but they're going to give it to you for a couple of years until you fall in love with it. And these are really critical ingredients of any entrepreneurial ecosystem, and this is still a young ecosystem, certainly by Silicon Valley standards, which is not really all that old. If you really, the history of the Silicon Valley as we know it today is only 19 years old, tracing its roots back to the first IPO of a company that ever went public losing buckets of money, and that was Netscape, which put the air hose into the internet bubble and set off the first wave of technology and venture-backed IPOs like nothing anyone had ever seen, and hopefully we won't see again, because it was a fairly unhealthy thing at the end of the day for entrepreneurs, even for those of us who managed to, not be so stupid as to think they were always going to keep going up forever and sell a little bit of it along the way.
What also is interesting, what is happening in the past 6 years, a lot of things changed. When I first started up evangelizing entrepreneurship, it was back in 2003. All the venture funds working here in the country you could count by just using one hand, like 3 or 4 venture funds, and nobody actually used the customer development. No one knew about the startups, and most of the funds were doing the private equity. They were doing retail deals. They were doing oil and gas, and no one except probably just few companies like Yandex and Abby and Kaspersky Lab were really doing technology. So back in
Kleiner Perkins and Sequoia.
In the United States, but
okay,
here
right.
Here in Moscow, we just had like 3, 4, 5 venture funds. We had Russian technologies, we had Runet, and basically we had Intel Capital, which I worked with at that time, and a few others like Delta. So in 2007, when we started evangelizing customer development, we really had to build a lot of things from scratch. Basically create our own events, promote using the partners like Microsoft, promote the idea and evangelizing the idea for creating new products for the technology companies. But what we currently see now, a lot of different incubators. Like when you came here in the 4 days, we went to the Higher School of Economics, we went to the Moscow State University, we went to Skalkovo, we went to the Moscow government building for today. So a lot of of incubators and a lot of good technology centers right now appearing. A lot of good events for entrepreneurs. So it's a tremendous change in terms of developing the ecosystem in the past 5 years that we are currently observing. And this is definitely good news about creating that entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country. And this is what customer development model can definitely benefit from, because all these centers, they need tools for entrepreneurs to succeed and to help the companies grow. And this is where the customer development model comes into place. That's basically
we still require
observation.
business plans and financial models that are venture funds.
Yeah, but I strongly advise entrepreneurs, and for my new company, which I am currently working at, I don't put together the business plan. I don't actually think about the monetization yet, because I still have to figure out the question, how do I retain the customers? And what I decided from the day one, I will have a freemium product. It's free to play. It should be very easy to use. It should be, the customers should be really addicted to the product. And after that, I will somehow figure out how to monetize them. And right now, I'm just currently focusing 100% on creating the product, which should be addictive for the customers. And that's an advice of focusing on what's really important for today. I would just give to the entrepreneurs. Don't bother just like putting complex financial projections if you don't need them at this moment of time. Just build good product, just get customers, just talk to customers. Don't put yourself in the toilet and close the door by, being fully blown away with your technology or invention, but just get out of the building. Even if it's cold outside, just get out of the building and talk to customers and iterate and pivot and build really awesome products. That's what customer development is about.
That's the summary of the book, right? That's the summary of the book.
Yes, it is. You cannot buy the book. You don't need to buy the book. Just go and build your company.
Yeah, that's...
Don't waste your time.
Well, in fact, we have one of my favorite lines in the book is, remember I was talking about that moment where all of a sudden you are getting buried in customers? And what we say is, if, please Lord, that happens to you, take this book, put it in the bottom drawer of your desk, and use all your entrepreneurial energy and talent to sell those customers, to make them ecstatically happy with your product or service. And you can return to the book later when you're lying on your sailboat or, motoring on your yacht, because it's all about getting customer traction. It's not about following every single step in the book.
Bob, when you were talking that you were involved with 20 companies and you're invested in 7, or actually worked at 7, that you gave up a regular job for that, that's the typical entrepreneurial profile, right? That's what a proper entrepreneur should be like. And I wonder, how does that reflect in your personal life, and how does that work with other entrepreneurs if they're unstable, say, in their work preferences? I mean, I'm like that. I like, reach a goal, get a new one, How does that work with in personal life? Is that the same, or is that different?
No, I've been married to this, well, actually, it's a funny story, but I've been married to the same woman for 35 years. And the joke we have between one another is the only reason I've been married to the same woman for 35 years is I've only been around for 17 of them. But a story I often tell to entrepreneurs is, in the first 5 or 6 years of my first business, I was working so hard, and I managed to find time to meet this absolutely, model quality, stunning, really smart young lady. And somehow or other, I convinced her to move in with me. And 2 or 3 months after she moved in, I came home one night at the usual 9, 10 o'clock, and she was packing. And I said, "What are you doing? Wasn't I great last night? Or what did I say something wrong? What?" She said, "No, I kind of figured out that you're never going to love me as much as you love your work. So why should I hang around?" And I really didn't have much of an argument. I gave her a big kiss, and she did the right thing, because she wanted a husband who was going to be home for dinner every night at 6 and wasn't going to go back to work and whatever. And I hope she, found that guy and made him very happy. And the woman I married, whatever, 6 or 7 or 8 years later, has a very full, active life of her own. She's a therapist with a busy practice, and if I don't come home on Monday or Thursday, she doesn't even notice because she's got late clinics both those nights. So the only nights I have to try to show up are Tuesday and Wednesday. And you know, I think if I really, the saddest sort of sacrifice of my entrepreneurial years was probably when my daughter, from the age of 2 or 3 to the age of 10, I wasn't around much during the week because we lived an hour from the office, and on a good day, work ended at 7, and if I raced home, I could read her a story before she went to bed, and if the train was late or whatever, I didn't see her at all because I was gone before she woke up. And so the way I tried to balance that was to almost never go to the office on the weekends and to be there, and we used to take hikes and do things that drove my wife crazy and whatever, but it was real father-daughter time. And I'm sort of so either disorganized or type A or work-focused or whatever it is, that the only way I can sort of remember to have a life is to have rules. Like tomorrow night when I get off the airplane, I'll put an autoresponder on my email that says, "See you next year, happy holidays," and I will do my best to not look at email for 10 days, which is like, you know, withdrawal for a drug addict. But I'm really gonna, you know, gonna try to just give my brain a break and spend more time doing family stuff, exercise, all the things I never quite seem to get to.
I can only wish everybody here tries to beat you on that.
I'm sorry?
I can only wish everybody here tries to beat you on 10 days without email.
Yeah. So,
why Stanford? I mean, Stanford is a little town for GE and DHL executives, right? And it's by no means entrepreneurial. It's far away from Boston. It's not the Silicon Valley. How did you end up there and, you know, became an entrepreneur?
I guess it was the closest place with grass and trees and where you could buy a house where you didn't see your neighbors that was still commuting distance to New York. Because I was really a New York creature for many years, and then I became a American Airlines creature, and it didn't matter where you lived as long as you were an hour from an airport because you were on airplanes all the time anyway. So, I don't know, you know, just stuff happens, right? That, you know, so I wonder if would we have some fun if we took a question or two from the group? Or
Sure.
did we sort of promise to do that? Or, yes, yeah.
I think this guy had a question for a while, right?
Ну, в общем, вопрос Бобу.
My question goes to Bob, guys. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys. The question goes to Bob. I realize that this is certainly not your first day in Russia. You probably have an impression already about the business models that are being implemented in Russia, maybe about the peculiarities of the Russian business. My first question, can you already put your finger on the differences in the way business is run in Russia versus, say, in the West, particularly in the internet segment, particularly internet business? Can you give one key piece of advice to internet startups in Russia? Thank you.
I think if I'm not sure this is a fully formed thought, but my instinct is very few of the Russian internet businesses are thinking beyond Russia at the outset, right? If you're doing a physical goods business or a service business, Obviously, you have to start on your home court and expand from there. But there's no reason in Russia you can't buy a .com or a .co or something else, either look for more of a niche global play or a broader play, which I don't see a lot of. But because the thing that I think holds you back otherwise, if you are first trying to build something just for Russia, there are some sort of different behavioral traits like lower credit card use, lower internet penetration, less likelihood to trust your personal or credit card information to the web. And so those may be things that hold you back if your first country is Russia. I don't know, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. You see an awful lot more Russian internet startups than I do. But to me, the most confounding thing is this, this is my idea, I don't share. I want all of the equity, all of the success. I don't need a co-founder. And I think that for Russian startups to really flourish, that has to change. And I think the investors really are part of the force that can help to drive that change, because the sort of rule of thumb in Silicon Valley is every startup should have 3 founders. Nobody cares whether they all own 33% or one owns 51. That's not the issue. It's the 3 body types: the hacker, the hustler, and the artiste. Right? The hacker is the brilliant coder, developer, product builder, whatever. The hustler is the customer developer, the salesperson, the marketing person, the outreach person. And the artiste is the UI, UX person who takes whatever those other 2 clowns figures out and makes sure that it's in the most human, consumer, customer compatible, usability, format, design, and so forth. And I would bet you if you look throughout the United States, Russia, China, you can't find all of those skills in one body anywhere. So why do Russian entrepreneurs think they can do it all? I mean, in one sense, it's sort of a noble level of self-confidence. In the other sense, would you rather own a third of a $100 million company or 100% of a $10 million company? And I think that, to me, is the biggest, or one of the biggest restrictions on the real opportunity for startup growth here.
I can also comment on that. When Steve visited it last year, he said one interesting thing. He said, I see...
That's a lot for him.
Yeah, he says very few of them, but they're really, 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 I would say, straight to the point.
He's learned to focus.
Yes, less is more. Maybe I don't notice a lot of other things because I got used to them, like get out of the building and iterate. But what he said about Russia, he said, I've seen a lot of talented and smart people who just standing here and waiting to be told what to do. That's the observation of the guy from the cowboy culture, because in the Silicon Valley it's a culture of action and doing a lot of things. In the Russia, people really want to be sure before doing something. They want to be sure that they are doing it right. They want to be sure they have all the knowledge they have in place to do it. They want to be sure they have all the skills. They want to be sure that the plan going to work, because it's completely different culture of seeing a failure here. And if you're failed in the United States, in the Silicon Valley especially, it's the culture that embraces failure and it's okay to fail. If you fail here, the community, the society will say, ah, you failed, so you didn't know that. And that's why the people, they're not just standing and waiting to be told what to do, as Steve has observed, but they're sort of trying to launch a space shuttle instead of starting a business. They want to be sure that every step on the road to success, they know for sure they're gonna get straight to the moon. And they construct lots of complicated, very smart, a lot of smart people thinking all the time and constructing a lot of complex plans and formulating all sorts of hypotheses about how to start the business and if it actually goes to the moon or not. And that's why the observation was they are really standing. They are not doing their companies. They are thinking all the time, but not acting. And almost contradictory to that is the Silicon Valley, the whole culture of the Silicon Valley, which Steve, as he said, is the cowboy culture. You don't think a lot. You just jump on the horse, you just try it, you just take the gun, you just shoot, you just see the gold, you grab the gold, you jump on the horse, you shoot again. And that's insane action without actually thinking a lot. But then it goes bottom up. You start collecting the experience. And as you
get shot.
Right. Sometimes you got shot, sometimes you fall down from the horse, but eventually, if you are lucky enough, you can get a bunch of gold. And that's the whole difference between the culture of doing companies here and doing companies in the Silicon Valley. You cannot, using your logic, build companies similar to Facebook or Twitter. You can, using your logic, build the companies like Parallels or Yandex or the Kaspersky Lab, which use heavy technology. It's like, being in the coal mine. You dig deeper, and you use that expertise and you use that technology brilliance, and then you find some algorithm that no one else knows in the world, and that's basically very similar to launching a space shuttle, right? But you cannot build good consumer companies, consumer internet companies, not technology heavy, based on this, digging deeper in the coal mine approach. And the Silicon Valley really proved of being capable of doing that. So one advice I would give to the Russian entrepreneurs, just jump on the plane, go to the Silicon Valley, and learn how to jump on the horse, ride it and shoot and get the gold and whatever. So that's a cultural difference, I think, that needs to be adjusted. And that's why I personally spent half of the time in the Silicon Valley, because otherwise I also start thinking too much. And sometimes I find myself, as a very smart Russian guy says, Nikolai, stop thinking too much, just do it, just go do it. Just jump on a plane, go to the Los Angeles. I just got a ticket to LA, which cost 17,000 rubles. It's basically $500. It goes straight from Moscow to Los Angeles and back to Moscow, $500, that's it. I just couldn't stand. I just bought the ticket and I said I would go to the Silicon Valley, spend a couple months there, do some customer development, talk to the venture funds, talk to customers, and then get back with the product here. That's it. So I encourage you guys.
And how old is your child?
2 years old. And I also think when you told about that story when you came back home and talked to your wife, I always thinking, is there a remedy for the entrepreneur to actually balance work and life? And so far, I couldn't find that remedy. And despite I'm still trying to do that, and,
Well, you weren't looking very hard this week, I can assure you.
Yes! I already got a few red notices from my wife. Nikolai, it's 10 p.m. now. What the fuck are you doing? Where are you? And I'm with Bob. We have a lecture. We visit incubator. And every day I get back home at 2 a.m. and then I get up at like 8 a.m., 7 a.m. in the morning, and then I leave. So when I come back home, the child is sleeping. When I leave home, she's also sleeping. And I'm always thinking, is there any remedy for the entrepreneurs, any cure, any magic recipe that will help to balance that?
But Bob, next time it's a work-life balance for entrepreneurs training.
Yes.
Well, no, I think there needs to be like a 12-step program like there is for alcoholics, or a treatment center for, where you go in and there's no internet and there's no television except like cartoons and sitcoms, and there's no business books in the library, and there's bars on the windows, and you can only come for a minimum of 3 months.
But it's also a mobile phone in the pocket. You always get your emails.
And the big nurse gets your BlackBerry and puts it someplace that hurts. Yeah, right. You know.
Well, that sounds like hell, Bob. I wouldn't go for it.
I once wrote an article for Marketing Magazine. It was called Emailitis, the Ebola of the modern age, and how addicted we all are to these horrible little devices. And I used to get so much grief for looking at it at the dinner table till my daughter married a man who has it like glued to his hand and can't take 2 bites with a fork without checking. And all of a sudden, it's like I never used the thing. It's very, so, you know, there are contrasts, but I actually think, and that's one thing I've actually tried to do. I recommend to all of you, when we go out to dinner with either just us or with friends, I leave the device in the car. So I have 3 hours off the grid, unannounced to anybody. And at 9 o'clock at night, when I usually have turned off my computer, I plug my iPhone into the charger on my desk at the other end of my house, and I'm off the grid. And so the only people who have my home phone number are my elderly mother, my daughter, her husband, and of course Steve, who uses it really, actually it's the only thing he uses, only, you know, when it's a serious problem or emergency. And it has really helped me, and you ought to think about a rule like that where you just get off the grid just for some piece of every day of your life. It's a real great sanity improver, you know, whether you're 63 or half that, and I don't know.
I think that's a great end note.
There was an interesting article.
I'll email you about it. Just give me a sec.
Tweet it.
There was an interesting article on the TechCrunch recently. It was called 7 Qualities of Highly Effective Mediocre Entrepreneurs. And one of the qualities was ability to zero task. The guy was writing just like, try not to do anything for 5 minutes. Just put off your email, just put off your phone calls, and just try, you know, just try to see how life is beautiful. Just try not to do anything and focus on this ability for zero tasking, not multitasking, but zero tasking.
So entrepreneurship is addictive. And Bob, as we should wrap up at this point, do you want to give your last advice to our addicts in the audience who are still up here at 10 p.m. listening to us?
Well, I guess I'll save the perfect ending for 30 seconds. Most of all, make sure you're working on something you really love, something where you're excited every day when you get up to go to work, not about how much money it might be worth, but about the fun, the challenge of the work you're doing. I did an unpaid workshop a month or so ago for 12 entrepreneurs at a $2 billion venture fund called the Acumen Fund. The investors in the Acumen Fund expect 0 return on their investment because the Acumen Fund invests in making the third world better, building sewer systems in these horrible backwoods towns and fresh water delivery and libraries and schools. And they try to take all these businesses, they're very much startups like your startups, and the goal is to get them to sustainable break-even. The 12 people in the room with me were all Harvard and Princeton and Yale, 100 applicants for every seat in that room. And these people were going to work in the worst cities, and they weren't even cities, the worst sort of backwater towns on the entire planet with bugs and filthy water and, you know, no Diet Coke and things like that for 2-year commitment for almost no money. God bless these people. And they were as excited about it as people working at the hottest IPOs in New York. And they were as, how else can I use this customer development stuff when the people don't even realize that they're customers? It was very interesting sort of turn of the method and so forth. And these people were so passionate about their work. I was so proud of them and so glad to have had the privilege to spend a day with them. And I think for all of you, this is a crazy, challenging journey, and the odds are it's not going to make you rich. So make sure it's fun and challenging, and every morning when you get up, you can't wait to get to work. Maybe Sunday is the exception. And then my last piece of advice is get out of the building. It's 10 o'clock. Go home to your loved ones and friends and, you know, whatever.
Well, cheers to the excitement and the families, right?
Cheers.
You can never forget about that.
Давайте я два слова добавлю.
Let me add two things in Russian. I recently read an interview with Belousov, and he gave an example of what Bob has just mentioned. So he talked about this guy from Let There Be Blood movie. So this dude spent his whole life working under horrible conditions, like 16 hours per day, and he committed all sorts of sins. You know, he would kill people, he would misbehave in order to earn shitloads of money, and then live alone in a big house, knowing that everybody actually hated his guts. So he eventually drank himself to death. And it was all about drilling for oil, you know. So if you don't like drilling for oil, don't do it. Don't do it. If you don't like it, don't try being an entrepreneur. Really, there are so many other simpler, easier, more civilized ways to make money and become a respectable, well-off person. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending this meeting, and we wish you all sorts of luck and success in your business. Thank you.